Hey there, everyone, and welcome. This is a bonus episode just for YouTube subscribers only. You might have noticed I'm running a little late with the regular podcast this week, and so I wanted to jump in and answer a couple of questions in this bonus Q&A episode. We've got two great questions that came in a couple of weeks ago when I put the call out for listeners to post questions they had. So we've got a question that's kind of multi-part about the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the ascendant being retrograde and an aspect there. And we have a second question, which I think is essentially about transits. So I'm going to speak a little bit to both of those questions in today's bonus episode. I also wanted to let you know that I do have my annual holiday sale happening this weekend. So until Monday, December 2nd, you can save 20% off all of my webinars and most of my astrology courses. The code to use to save 20% is LIGHT20, and I'll make sure it's posted in the show notes below. Pop over to kellysastrology.com. Make sure you enter that code LIGHT20 when you're checking out and save on your astrology learning. Whether you have missed a class this year that you want to catch up on, or whether you'd like to stock up on some astrology classes that you want to spend time working through in 2025, now is your chance to get those trainings at the best price. So the special code for the holiday sale this weekend is LIGHT20, and you will save 20% off all of my webinars and most of my astrology training courses. Pop over to kellysastrology.com to save. All right, well, with that said, let's get into our questions for today. So the first question, I'll read the question out in full, and then we'll go through some info about responding to it. So the question is, first question, this came in by Karen X, and she says, could you explain about the ruler of the ascendant being in the seventh house and the ruler of the ascendant being retrograde? And she says, I'm struggling to understand it. I'm a Scorpio sun and rising. So we have a Scorpio ascendant with Scorpio in the first house. And we have retrograde Mars in the seventh house. And she goes on to say that the sun is opposite that retrograde Mars. And she also says very kindly, thanks so much. Your videos are so informative. Keep it up. So thank you for that kind comment there, Karen. Okay, so let's see if we can help you out with your question. Let me pop this up here, actually. So the first part of your question, the ruler of the ascendant in the seventh house. So let's back up one sec because it's important for us all to understand how important the ruling planet of the ascendant is. In ancient astrology, Hellenistic astrology, this planet was given a special designation known as the helmsman. And that identifies this planet, the one that rules the sign on your ascendant, as the planet that has its hands on the steering wheel of your life. And so this planet really indicates the primary focus or a very strong energetic emphasis that is guiding you forward through this lifetime. So that planet becomes really important as a symbol of who you are, what you're interested in, and how you go about pursuing the things that are important to you. So that's why the ruling planet of the ascendant is always important. And so whatever house that ruling planet of the ascendant falls in will typically tell you a set of topics or highlight a group of people or a type of person that is really of paramount importance to you. And I wanted to explain it in this kind of, global, here's the teaching theory way, so that even if you're listening and your ascendant ruling planet isn't in the seventh house, you can at least start to understand the importance of the house that your ascendant ruling planet is in. Okay, so if the ascendant ruling planet is in the seventh house, that is going to tell us that partnerships and significant others are of primary importance. The planet ruling the ascendant represents you, and when the ruler of the ascendant is in the seventh, what that's telling us is you are sitting in the place of the chart to do with partnerships, primary relationships, and significant others. And this is going to highlight the importance of the people that you form partnerships with and the big impact that the relationships and partnerships that you're in will have on you as a person. So that's our first piece of interpretive info here. Now, the second part of your question, the ruler of the ascendant is retrograde. Now, this is really a primary consideration, or it's an important factor if the ruling planet of your ascendant is one of those quicker moving planets who happens to go retrograde, which includes Mercury, Venus, and Mars. These three planets, the retrograde is an important part of the process of consideration around the overall condition, effectiveness, pacing, and function of that planet. Now, the retrograde isn't the only factor that goes into understanding the condition and effectiveness of a planet, but it's one part of it. So, the ruling planet of the ascendant, if it's retrograde, we've got all of those classic retrograde words coming in to describe you, to describe maybe your focus, your orientation, and sometimes even your pacing. And so, if the ruler of the ascendant is retrograde, there is more of an internal focus. So, it can be very important to get to know your insides before you can create progress or move forward in your world externally. We know that retrogrades are associated with things like reviewing and rethinking. So going over and repetition can be important if the ruler of the ascendant is retrograde. So there are a few pieces. I just want to make sure. Oh, yeah. And then the idea of taking a little bit of extra time. You might find if you are someone like Karen who has a faster moving planet, Mercury, Venus, or Mars, ruling the ascendant and it's retrograde in your birth chart, it might be that you find you move at a slower pace compared to people that are a similar age or stage of life to you, that you might need a little bit more time to figure things out that other people seem to come to decisions around more quickly. Now, fast and slow is not a qualitative thing, like one is not better or worse. It's really just a description of the pacing that feels better for you. So I'm hoping to kind of take some of the negativity away from the retrograde here. You can probably hear that in my language. The bigger piece around your particular ascendant ruling planet here, Karen, is that it is technically in the sign of its detriment. So when we talk about factors that affect a planet's condition, whether it's direct or retrograde, absolutely is one of those factors. Another huge factor, and arguably more important factor, is the quality of the sign relative to the planet. So is your planet ruling the ascendant? Is it in exaltation or rulership? Is it in detriment or fall? Is it in the sign of its triplicity according to the sect of the chart? Is it placed at such a subsection part of the zodiac sign that it might be in its own terms or bounds? These are all sign-based criteria that influence the effectiveness, the kind of functionality of a planet. And so it's a lot of detail to get into. And if you're newer to traditional styles of astrology, some of the words I'm using might be new for you, but these will be terms and techniques that you can start learning more about. And so in your case, Karen, the ascendant ruling planet, and this happens to anybody whose ascendant ruling planet is in the seventh house. Especially if you're using a whole sign chart format, that automatically means that the ascendant ruling planet will be in the sign of its detriment because it will be in the sign opposite the one that it rules, which is the definition of how we figure out a planet's detriment placement. Now, when a planet's in detriment, one of the qualitative changes that comes in is that planet is understood to be not well resourced, which means it's a planet that has to figure out how to make its way without having the best support, the highest quality encouragement. And so getting really innovative, getting creative, figuring out how to make do or to use things in unusual or unconventional ways are some of the expressions that I see for a planet that happens to be in the sign of its detriment. It's also an indication of an increased level of flux or inconsistency about that planet. And so if your ascendant ruling planet is in detriment, and if it's Mars in Taurus, that would be Mars in detriment. what that's telling us is that some of those Mars things, confidence, motivation, drive, and determination, even decisiveness, will fluctuate. That you may have periods where you feel really clear, you feel really strong, you feel really confident, you're kind of getting things going. And then you might have periods where you go into a time where you're dealing with some self-doubt, or there's more insecurity or worry, or things become, things are kind of steady for a while and then they become wobbly or uncertain for a while. And that idea of kind of fluctuating between feeling really productive and constructive and then feeling a little bit at sea, losing focus, maybe losing physical energy or losing that psychological drive and motivation, these are all part of the experience of having Mars in detriment. So to your question, Karen, there's a lot of pieces there, but I'm hoping by talking you through some of the factors that are connected to your Mars that would help you understand that. I know you also mentioned about you have the Sun in Scorpio opposite that Mars retrograde in Taurus. And then we're getting into even more comprehensive chart interpretation skills where we're looking at an aspect and we're trying to look at that aspect from the perspective of each of the different planets to see what is going on there. So an opposition aspect is an aspect of, differing priorities or that sense of the either or choice or decision. Now, if you're a Scorpio rising chart, it means you have a Leo 10th house. And so the sun would be one of those planets that has something to do around career for you. And so if we think about the sun as being a planet that represents career and Mars as being a planet that represents you via their rulership, Mars rules that Scorpio ascendant and the sun rules that Leo 10th house, what we might say is there might feel like in your experience, there is some tension between the work that shows up for you to do and the kind of person that you are. Maybe it means that there are some stressful situations that show up at work that really aggravate you as a person. Maybe it's tricky for you to find harmony or ease between work life and personal life. Maybe there are some things that have gone on around your body or your physical health, which are also represented by that ascendant ruling planet Mars, that have been exacerbated or aggravated by work stuff. Maybe some of those Mars things, Mars in detriment things of being in flux or chopping and changing, or maybe things ending before they really get to where you wanted them to go. Maybe that Mars energy is showing up around work and career via that opposition aspect. Another way of describing or interpreting this might be that part of your work in the world, Sun, is helping people navigate change or disruption or uncertain circumstances. So we could see that expression of that aspect coming in a few different ways. So thank you so much, Karen, for sharing just a little bit about your chart. And I hope that's been helpful for you and for anyone else who's listening who wanted to take in some of those core teachings. What I will say is I often get questions like this from students, and it's when you're looking at anything in the birth chart, whether it's a planet placed somewhere, a planet that's retrograde, an aspect, a planet in a house, whatever it is you're looking at, try to ask yourself, why am I looking at that particular planet? Traditional astrology has this real orientation towards a topical approach of chart interpretation. And that's a framework that I kind of immediately go to when I think about working with charts. And so in your case, Karen, I'm like, if we're looking at the ruler of the ascendant, what we're trying to look at is the planet that symbolizes you as a person, your psychological state, your mindset, your attitudes, habits, and behaviors, some of the qualities of energy that you find yourself participating in. And the ruler of the ascendant also tells us about your health, your body, your well-being, and your vitality. And so once we know, okay, this planet represents these topics, then what do we know from a technical perspective in the chart about this planet? And how can that speak to specifically these topics that planet is responsible for? Okay, I feel like I'm getting into my teaching space here, but hopefully that has been helpful, Karen. And thank you again for submitting a question. I so appreciate it. All right, team, let's take a look at our second question, which comes in from LS. And LS says, thank you, Kelly. I'm glad I found you through Yasmin's podcast. Fantastic. Welcome. Yasmin is a dear long-term astro friend and buddy. We have known each other for many decades now. And a few months ago, I was on her podcast. So I know some of you might be joining me here via that pathway. So welcome. LS goes on to say, I'm newer to astrology, and my question is, when planets match up with a person's natal chart, what effects can we expect to feel? I'm experiencing my Saturn in Pisces, Jupiter in my ascendant Gemini, Venus in Cap, Chiron in Pisces, and LS goes on to say I'm Aquarius, Sun and Moon, and that they're happy to learn from me. So thanks so much for sharing your question. So I'm just reading between the lines here, and I think what you're asking about is when you say when a planet matches up with somebody's natal chart, I think what you're referencing is the transits or the real-time movements of the planets and what happens when they are back in signs in the sky that might be important in our personal birth chart. And I'm guessing, LS, that you might actually have Saturn in Pisces yourself, and you're noticing that transiting Saturn is currently back in Pisces. And that will tell us that you are having something called a Saturn return, which is the return of Saturn back to the same zodiac sign that you were born in. That typically happens to all of us about twice throughout our life. It's usually in the late 20s, 28, 29, 30, and then again in the late-ish 50s, like 57, 58, 59. So you will be either one of those age groups and you are having your Saturn return. The Saturn return is a really pivotal restructuring time. It's a cycle of maturity, of noticing how time is passing. Sometimes we feel that time is speeding by and we're running out of time when we're going through our Saturn return. And that can prompt us to reassess our priorities, our choices, our commitments, and our obligations. And we might do that across the board. We might do that at work, in our relationships with family, around wellness and self-care, about our money. You might do it specifically around the topics of the Pisces house in your birth chart, or you might just do this kind of life overview because Saturn return and Saturn transits of all kinds encourage us into a more mature, wise part of ourself. So working with that sense of I might willingly embrace some limits for my long-term benefit and protection is a great motto to take on board if you are in a Saturn return or any other Saturn transit. The transit that you mentioned, LS, that I really wanted to speak to because I've got the clearest sense of it from your question is Jupiter in your Gemini ascendant. And that there, I have a really clear sense that you are a Gemini rising or a Gemini ascendant chart. And of course, currently transiting Jupiter is in Gemini. And so this is a transit. This is one of the most widely used timing techniques in modern astrology practice. It wasn't necessarily the most important timing technique in ancient astrology practice, but it is something that is very common and used by almost all astrologers and astrology students today in present day time. So what we're looking at when a transiting planet comes to something in the natal chart is we're trying to figure out what kind of energy is the transiting planet bringing in and which parts of my life am I going to experience or feel that in. So if transiting Jupiter is coming to your Gemini ascendant, let's start with that Gemini ascendant first. So your ascendant, kind of similar to what we were talking about with Karen, your ascendant is the single most sensitive part in your birth chart. It represents the moment where you were born, where you had your first breath kind of outside the womb, and it symbolically represents this kind of meeting of the sky and the earth. And that ascendant, it represents east from a compass direction at the time and place that you were born. And the degree on your ascendant is one of the most sensitive points and one of the most important points in the birth chart. It's important because it tells us a lot about who you are and also about the other parts of your life. And that ascendant degree is really sensitive from a timing perspective. So I'll just quickly recap the ascendant topics. We did talk about them in Karen's question. So the ascendant is about you. It's about your body, your physical shape and form, what your body does well, what your body can struggle with or be sensitive about. But it's also about the kind of core essence of your personality, your psychological mindset, your personality, your habits, your attitudes, the kinds of behaviors that express this kind of really pure essence of who you are. So, somebody with a Gemini rising is typically a very kind of sociable, curious type of person. Not all Gemini risings are really outgoing, but every Gemini rising thinks a lot and is curious and wants to know a wide variety, wants to know a little bit about a wide variety of topics and interests. Gemini is also one of our mutable signs. And if you have a mutable sign rising, you like a little bit more flexibility. You like to kind of mix things up. You like to maybe change your style or your expression. And you like to keep a bit of flexibility and freedom in your schedule and in your life. So that's some basics about the Gemini rising. It's an air sign. So we've got this sort of intellectual orientation and a willingness to kind of interact. And then we want to add the energy of Jupiter in. And so Jupiter is an expansive planet. It has a very optimistic quality. So it can be uplifting, it can be hopeful, it can encourage you to look to the future or plan for growth, if you like. Jupiter is associated with abundance, but it's not always monetary abundance that Jupiter brings or offers. Rather, Jupiter can bring an abundance of support or an abundance of vitality, or it can, bring that abundance of a positive mood, if you like. Generally speaking, most people are kind of happy when they're having some kind of Jupiter transit because there tends to be a bit of a buffering, protective energy, as well as this openness to opportunity. Now, Jupiter's primary theme is that it's about wisdom, it's about growth, it's about helping you find a sense of purpose or meaning. It's not always going to give you things that you think you want. That's an important misconception I want to just speak to with Jupiter, where we sometimes think, this is what I want, I'm having a Jupiter transit, I'm going to get it. Jupiter is really invested in the growth of kind of the soulful, spiritual part of you. And what might be good for that could be different sometimes than what we think. So that's important to keep in mind. So, LS, for you, some things to think about with Jupiter going over your ascendant. This only happens once every 12 years. So for any of you who are also Gemini ascendants or Gemini risings, you have this 12-month period from late May of 2024 to early June of 2025, where you have Jupiter, the greater benefic, in your first house with your ascendant. This can help with improving your physical vitality. It doesn't mean that your health is perfect, but it can mean that if there is something going on with your body, you're able to find a practitioner or a health professional to help you with improving or fixing that. It may mean there is a treatment, a lifestyle adjustment, a change, or a supplement or a medication that you can reach for that is going to bring improvements. So that's part of the helpful nature of Jupiter. Jupiter in your first house is also a great time to think about personal growth and self-development. This once in 12-year transit of Jupiter through your ascendant is a really special time to get to know who you are, to update your values, your perspectives, your beliefs based on what's important to you now. Think about the last 12 years and everything that you've experienced, everything that you've learned, even things that you've let go. And that can help you kind of clue into what is becoming important to you now. And as you get more increasingly clear in that conscious mind awareness place of this is what matters to me now, that is going to help you with decision making going forward. I always encourage my clients who are having Jupiter in the first house to think about special adventures, kind of one-off experiences, and to really give themselves permission to take up a lot of space and to be the priority. And so I would share those tips with you as well. Now, if you're not a Gemini rising and you're listening to this, keep in mind that in June of 2025, Jupiter will move into Cancer, and the Cancer ascendant or Cancer rising group of people will start their 12 12-month cycle of personal growth and self-development. So hopefully, Ellis, that is giving you a little bit of understanding about what's going on when a planet in the sky by transit might be activating something in the birth chart. The topic of transits is a huge piece. I have so many different courses and classes on understanding transits, identifying transits, but most of all, interpreting transits. And so I would encourage you to seek out info on that. I've also got lots of free blog posts on my website, kellysastrology.com, that will take you through some real life examples of those transits. But that's what's going on, LS. When you see a planet matching up with something in your birth chart, you are having a transit. Could be a Saturn transit, a Uranus transit, or as we talked about for you today, a Jupiter transit. So a huge thanks to Karen and LS for sending in your questions. A huge thanks to all of you for listening and watching the show over the past 18 months. I appreciate your patience as I work to get this week's show up and running. You will notice that this is a little bit more kind of casual. This bonus episode is not going through the usual podcast editing process. So I do appreciate your patience with things like, maybe the sound isn't quite at the level of normal, but hopefully it is good enough that you can take in this info. And of course, if you are looking to save on your astrology classes and training, do take advantage of that 20% offer, 20% off offer that I have running this weekend. The code to save is LIGHT20. Pop over to kellysastrology.com to use that. All right, team, I'll be back to share more real soon. If you have questions that you would like answers to, pop them in the comments below. I will be doing a few Q&A episodes over the end of year period, and so I will be able to answer more of your questions then. All right, everyone, thanks for listening, and we will talk again soon. Bye for now.